Next presenters are Patrick McGalliard, the VP of Business Development, and Vince Matherne, the Chief Product Officer from Encompass Digital Media. They're going to talk about the challenges and opportunities for broadcast and cable networks in over-the-top.
Right, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay in the back? Good? Okay. So as we were saying, we're going to cover, in 20 minutes, we're going to cover what we do know. I think the session where we cover everything that we don't know about OTT is probably significantly longer, just with the way the space is. So today we're going to cover the realities of the marketplace. I think it's interesting times that we're all living in, whether you're on the network side, whether you're on the vendor side, whether you're a services provider. Today are interesting times in terms of the delivery of video. So where's digital marketing going? What do we know today? We know that consumers want a simple experience. We know that they want something personalized, getting the right relevant content to them. And then lastly, the mobile component, the mobility component, consumers increasingly want their content delivered to them anytime, anywhere. So whether it's skinny bundles, OTT, TVE, SVOD, TVOD, DRM, a lot of acronyms for the crazy times that we're living in, but the reality is there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace today, especially if you're the content provider or you're the network. What's the best way to go about it? How do I leverage a great brand and acknowledge that what my customers have known and the relationship I've had with my customers in many instances for decades is changing at light speed? If you look at the marketplace today, so let's talk about Netflix and Amazon and some of the things that they're doing. Not only are these guys actually approaching the market with premium offerings, they're actually to a point where they're creating their own content. They're doing so successfully. You also have the niche content, which labeled here as super niche. This is the reality as a content producer is I have the ability to reach direct to consumer, the right audience, with the right marketing, with the right device, in the right way, at the right time, something I didn't have before. We're partnered with WWE, who's a great example, where they, as of January, had actually produced 1.2 million subscriptions to their $10 a month subscription service on WWE. So as you can tell, that's a fledgling service that's growing, that I'd even use niche in a careful way because I think it's a big market. So there's an example. And oh, by the way, as all this is happening, the quality expectation is that it be broadcast quality. So as sporting events are streamed to your phone, as you're viewing something on a mobile device or in your bedroom on a computer, the expectation is that it's not any different than a 4K experience on a 70-inch TV. I think everybody in this room has probably seen some iteration of this. And oh, by the way, don't adjust your eyes, television is indeed still growing. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that as a content provider folks are facing today is it's not that it's necessarily customers leaving TV and going to the mobile device or going to the set-top box or going to the new method of delivery. They want it in addition to. You have subscribers who are so engaged with your content, so loyal to your brand, that they want to engage in as many platforms as possible. So for us, that creates a unique opportunity in terms of how to reach that market. And just a slight segue, I'll give an example. For a minute, pretend I am a middle-aged father of three, married. A typical Wednesday night in my house, and I'm sure for a lot of folks here, is walk in the door. My wife, her typical consumption of video is, let's say it's a show like Grey's Anatomy, where she'll probably watch it on demand after the show airs, but that same night later on TV. My 15-year-old daughter, we spent a lot of time in the Bay Area, so she's a big Golden State Warriors fan. On a typical night, she's watching NBA League Pass and watching the Golden State Warriors. And she's watching that on her laptop in her bedroom. My 12-year-old son, who's a gamer, is probably watching on Xbox Live or on his computer, he's watching esports, which if any of you haven't had exposure to esports, it's something that is gaining in popularity so fast that there are regularly more than 500,000 to 1 million viewers of these events. They're realistically just watching other people play games. Lastly, you've got my 10-year-old. My 10-year-old is traditionally watching Netflix, and he's probably watching it on Apple TV. He might be watching it on Xbox Live, and he's watching it as he wants to. Me, I'm the dinosaur, in that I still watch morning news, morning sports, morning weather, I have my loyalties to my shows, but I'm on the road. I travel 3/4 of the time, so I'm typically watching either on a computer or on a laptop. So I don't think any of these are unique to my family. I think the reality is it's what makes the space so dizzying right now, what makes the decision process so hard in terms of looking at what's the right solution. How do I pick a winner when the industry itself looks like this? And by the way, these move almost daily in terms of where people are at. So you've got, in today's environment, you've got the MVPDs, the MSOs. There's still the dominant players in broadcast. However, you've got all these market disruptors. So from Hulu to Netflix to Amazon, YouTube, Sling, the list goes on and on. All these guys are very aggressively reaching out to consumers. There's pressure to create skinny bundles, reach every device. That's a very real factor. Ultimately, TV everywhere. Can I authenticate what I have and get that to the right subscribers who are already subscribing to my service? Over the top, is there a way I can reach my niche? Can I get to that consumer directly and cut out the middleman so I can get the content right to the subscriber and get the feedback back? You also have operators like AT&T and Verizon. So you guys have seen what's happened with Go90, where again, back to the example in my house, my daughter very regularly watches concerts on Go90. So all of this, I think, is a problem and an opportunity if you're a network today in terms of looking at the space and trying to determine, how do I tackle this with a limited budget, knowing the reality is 3 years ago, I think there were a lot of what we refer to as pop-up OTT. So it would be, you know what, I was told by my chief revenue officer or my CEO that we needed to, quote, get live and get digital. That could mean I'm finding content that is rights cleared that may be 3 years old, and I'm gonna put it on the internet, and it's there. With the way that the evolution has happened over the last 2 to 3 years, you have players, intelligent content providers, things like the NFL, and they're probably a shining example where they've done a marvelous job of identifying that these are new revenue streams for them and creating licenses for things like Thursday night NFL games that are separate from the traditional broadcast models. So you have now an entire market that is bifurcating in terms of the amount of licenses that are out there. Again, back to the user dynamic. The user doesn't care that it's on a mobile device anymore, or that it's on a tablet, or that it's not on a 70-inch screen. They still expect that type of experience. And then the dollars have shifted such that in terms of the rights and the licenses, the brand still has to remain sacrosanct as they're moving forward with what you're doing. So probably done a good job of creating, at least defining the problem. Have Vince walk you through some of what you guys are looking at in terms of thinking about how to solve the problem.
Hopefully. So I think most of you have probably seen this slide or something like this slide. So at Encompass, we're very fortunate to provide channel playout services for roughly 850 channels globally. And so our clients look at this as the landscape of how they have to navigate. And what they're looking at is how much expertise do they have to have in-house? Which vendors, which service providers will they work with, partner with for the model that they're looking at right now, the monetization model, the rights model, knowing that in 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years, mostly 3 weeks or 3 months, it's going to change, and then it's going to change, and then it's going to change. So all of our clients tell us the same thing. They don't have a clear vision as to what's going to happen much past a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, but they have no idea what the landscape will be in 3 years. They focus on their content strategy. They're going to focus on which path they're going to use to contact their clients and be in touch with their clients, and then which model they're going to use for monetization. And that model will change repeatedly and rapidly. So what they have to look at is how do they deal with their content rights, whether it's for television versus web, whether it's country by country, region by region. The monetization models, how will they deal with those? How are they going to change from maybe subscription to ad-supported or back and forth? How are they going to deal with the technical complexity, and how much internal expertise do they need to have to execute on these? Cost to deliver, issues with authentication, on and on and on. So they're very unclear at the bottom. The strategy for it is very unclear. So what we're working with our clients on, and most of the people in this room are probably service providers, equipment providers. You play in this space, and what we're working with our clients on is the expectations for OTT delivery has changed in the last 3-6 months, a couple of years. If it got there eventually, great, and now it's all about broadcast quality, reliability, and monetization. A while back, that was not really the case. So as long as our clients continually focus on quality, reliability, and leveraging their innate broadcast infrastructure, whether that's in-source or outsource, that's going to get them to phase one. Phase two, everything we talked about before, things are happening very rapidly, and they have to change and change and change. If they invest in large amounts of people, capital, expertise, as soon as they've got that all invested, the landscape has shifted again. And so they've got to change and change and change. So if you take number two, and they look at, they still want to keep in focus, they want to develop best-in-class solutions, but knowing that that solution is going to change based on the business model and the landscape, they need to rely on number four, being able to scale and exercise external expertise, service providers, so that they can dynamically change and keep moving and keep moving. So our mission to them is, don't get so emotionally invested in whatever your latest great thought was, because it's almost already outdated, and you're going to have to change again, and you're going to change again, because you're going to have some new innovation in the industry, some new technology, some new disruptor. Nobody knows what it's going to be. It's going to come, and it's going to come again and again. And as long as they keep this in mind, they'll stay in the right frame of mind and be able to maneuver around the industry. So this is what we're working with our clients on. You guys probably hear a lot of the same thing. We're working with a lot of you guys here in the room to develop solutions for these 850 linear channels, but this is what they live in every day. And it's a difficult landscape, and it's a difficult environment. So again, this is the way we're leveraging how we're moving forward with our clients. And that's pretty much it. We're just ready for questions.
Any questions for Vince or Patrick? Yep, I'll bring the microphone.
So I'm sure people know about your current general customers, but are you fostering any type of innovation from the new OTT players? You know, maybe the smaller 2 to 3 channels and those kind of things to kind of foster the market.
Sure. So we've got a lot of large global tier one. I want to make sure I'm answering your question. Large tier one global clients that have 20, 30, 40 channels in multiple regions, but we've also got startup channels that may have 1 or 2 channels. They may just have a D2 in the US. So they're looking at very different than what the tier one guys would be doing, is how can they quietly, calmly, economically get into multi-screen environments. So absolutely we're working with them on, and the business model for that is obviously very different than when you're looking at someone that's got 40 channels and billions of dollars at stake. Yeah.
Other questions?
Can you talk about how broadcasters and cable networks here are, changing their view about investing in technology that they're going to own versus outsourcing it, and having someone else manage core parts of their, to be able to get some of that scale you were talking about, and that flexibility?
Every client that we work with has a perspective, and it's mostly driven by legacy stances, internal politics, and then when there is a change of ownership of the company, a change of management, a edict to cut X hundreds of millions of dollars, the mentality quickly shifts from in-source to outsource. And so obviously as an outsourced service provider, we're banking on, as the complexity happens and as the landscape shifts, it's just too much for them to keep up with internally. So the fundamental nature is, as the complexity happens, and instead of just moving here, they have to move like this, it makes much more sense for them to outsource, as long as we as a service provider can give them a very flexible business model where we can move, we can be dynamic, we can be flexible. And so in the traditional broadcast space, we would typically look at contracts that were 5 years long, 7 years long. Nobody is going to sign up for a 5 or 7 year contract in this. So we've got to take it upon ourselves to say, that's fine. We don't need that. We'll take that risk, and we will move with you.
The other thing, put my mic. Thanks. The other thing I would throw out there too, just in terms of the conversation with the networks, a lot of it, Vince is right. Sometimes it really does happen as a result of a change. I used to be on the cable, the affiliate, and the digital side of things, and we'd see it there too, where there was always this this rub between quote digital team and the traditional team, and in a lot of instances today, that's now either the same person from an executive decision-making perspective, or those two people are reporting into the same centralized party. And what we're hearing a lot more of versus 3 years ago is, what are our true core competencies? As a content provider, what is it that we do well? And in some of them, it may be not just the content creation and the editorial. It may also be, let's say, the monetization, right? Where it varies by case, but what we've seen is a lot bigger focus from the networks and the broadcasters at trying to understand their value proposition. And then they're not necessarily all in to go outsource everything else, but I think they're very open to receiving some guidance on some options to consider, because again, the infrastructure, what's required to do this, isn't scalable. If you build it on a Tuesday, to Vince's point, a lot of it is out of whack a week and a half later. It's just the reality of the industry. So the managed services are helpful to them from that perspective, but they're not letting go of the things that they do best.
Yeah, what we would see is that the traditional broadcast side of the house would not speak to the internal online side of the house, or digital side, whatever they would call it internally. It's those crazy kids on that other floor, and we don't talk to them, and now the landscape's changed, absolutely changed. Yeah.
When do you think we're going to hit that inflection point where the average streaming video session has the same quality that people would expect from the average sit down in front of the television and cable box experience?
It's a great question. My crystal ball fell on my Ouija board, and they both broke. So
it was, the question really was, are we even close? Are we there?
From a service provider standpoint, absolutely we're there. But at price points that, when there was no revenue attached to it, it wasn't attainable, because it was, hey, just get it on the air, that's fine, we don't really care about that. If somebody's willing to invest in that service, then absolutely, we can do that simultaneously, we can do that right now. So for an example, we did a lot of the back-end work for the NFL. NFL Network is one of our big clients. We worked with Yahoo in the NFL to perform the streaming service, all the back-end work, the signal acquisition. We used the exact same technology, the exact same thought process on redundant signal acquisition, redundant streaming, redundant fiber, redundant satellite, simply on the acquisition into the streaming that we then handed off redundantly to Yahoo.
And do you have ways to identify when there is some issue, to pinpoint where that issue might be?
Absolutely. So we've instigated the same things we do in the broadcast side of the house. So 24/7 monitoring, 24/7 dedicated NOCs for the digital services that are integrated with the signal acquisition on the broadcast side. So before, our client said, don't worry about it. If it goes down, it goes down. We won't worry about it. Now, that's just not the way it can be. Nobody will tolerate that. We won't tolerate that. So we've used the same thought process, the same system, the same expertise to say, on your OTT service, we're going to institute everything we have on the broadcast side, because that's the expectation. So right now, we originate the WWE channel. We do the same thing there. NFL Network, same thing there. So we can't tolerate not doing broadcast quality, because that's where the landscape is now. Again, very different than what it was just a year or so ago.
Hey, Vince. Yeah, what do you see as the tipping point, whether it's in CapEx or redundant hardware, on your bullet point number 4 of relying on a third party to support them versus the in-house solutions that people are trying to create?
That's a great question. And instead of a CapEx, OpEx, what we've looked at is, if you need a service now, and you might think 6 or 8 months you don't need it anymore. You're not going to sign up with a year-long contract with any service provider, CapEx, OpEx. If we as a service provider can aggregate enough equipment manufacturers, OVPs, CDNs, end-to-end services, if we can set this up correctly, we will take the CapEx, OpEx risk, the expertise risk, and if we can make your service to us dynamic and flexible and short-term as it relates, getting into the business, the contractual pieces, then you don't have to worry about that, and we can take that on. So that's where we are at this time. Yeah.
One more question over here.
Yeah, sure.
Just curious, because you've probably got a lot of experience with this, but everybody's competing for eyeballs. You've got the established incumbents with a lot of infrastructure, a lot of commitments there when you're talking about the shift between capital and operating expenses. Do you find that maybe some of the incumbents are actually at a disadvantage because they're kind of committed to an existing infrastructure, and it may be difficult for them to easily incorporate some of the new disruptive technologies and solutions that are coming out there?
Yes, we have sunk CapEx, and some of that sunk CapEx we have to abandon and just move. And that's not a great, any CFOs in the room? Not a great conversation to have with your CFO, but it's absolutely what the market demands right now. So you convince the CFO by saying, if we don't do this, we don't need you because they don't need us, and we're done. So we absolutely have to move. So obviously this is a hugely disruptive point in the market right now. And so we have to say, sunk cost. CFO, you understand sunk cost. We're done with that. We have to move this way. And so it's a pretty easy discussion when you talk about the risk to ongoing and future revenue if you don't make the change. So with our clients, if they insource that, they've either got to shuck their sunk CapEx, or they're not going to be competitive, or they have to convince vendors to work with them, or they can work with a service provider and demand that that's the business model they go down.
Do you find they're open to that, though? Like, we're tough stuff?
It's individual conversations, absolutely. Yep.
All right, thank you very much, Patrick and Vince.
Thank you.